Captain Ryan Mitchell took one look at the 17-year-old standing in his briefing room and dropped her file into the trash can without opening it. "This is a joke," he said loud enough for every operator in the room to hear. "Somebody sent me a child to babysit." The men laughed. Emily Carter did not flinch. She walked over, lifted her file out of the trash, set it back on his desk, and said nothing at all. Because she already knew that by the end of that week, the loudest man in the room would be the one quietly asking for her help. Before we go any further, if stories about courage, discipline, and proving the doubters wrong are the kind that stay with you long after they end, take a moment to subscribe to this channel and follow Emily's journey all the way to the last minute. And leave a comment telling us which city you are watching from right now so we can see just how far this story has traveled around the world. The room went quiet after Emily set the file back down. Not respectful quiet, the kind of quiet that comes right before men decide how they are going to enjoy themselves at someone else's expense. Captain Mitchell stared at the folder like she had put a dead animal on his desk. He was a big man, broad through the shoulders, with a kind of face that had stopped smiling somewhere around his second combat tour. He had commanded the Eagle Recon Unit for 6 years. He had buried 4 men in that time. He had earned the right in his own mind to decide who walked through his door. And what had walked through his door today was a girl who looked like she should be studying for a chemistry final. "You picked my file up out of the trash," Mitchell said slowly. "Yes, sir," Emily answered. "Why would you do that?" "Because it has my name on it," she said, "and I don't leave my name in the garbage." A few of the men made a low sound in their throats, the sound of guys who just watched somebody take a small swing at the boss. Mitchell's jaw tightened. He leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. "You know where you are?" he asked. "Eagle Recon Selection, sir." "You know what we do here?" "Yes, sir." "No," Mitchell said. "You don't. You think you do. You read a brochure and you watch some videos and your daddy told you war stories and now you think you understand what happens in this unit. You don't understand a single thing that happens here, and you won't because you will be gone before you get the chance to." Emily did not answer. That was the thing that started to bother the men in the room, more than her age, more than her shyness. It was the silence. Most people, when you came at them like that, they talked. They defended themselves. They got loud or they got scared. Emily just stood there and looked at him with a calm that did not belong on the face of a 17-year-old. It was not arrogance. Arrogance the men would have understood. Arrogance they could have crushed in about an hour. This was something else. This was patience. And patience made them nervous because patience is the one thing you cannot fake and cannot rush. "Nothing to say," Mitchell pushed. "You didn't ask me a question, sir," she said. Behind her, a soldier named Sergeant Dolan snorted. Dolan was the loudest man in the unit, a thick-necked shooter from Alabama who had been on the team longer than almost anyone and who had decided the second he saw Emily's face that she was going to be the entertainment for the month. Captain Dolan said, grinning, "Permission to say what everybody's thinking." "Denied," Mitchell said, but he did not really mean it, and Dolan knew he did not really mean it. "She's going to hurt herself out there," Dolan said, ignoring the order, the way you can ignore an order you know is a formality. "We got 110-degree days on that range. We got rucks that weigh more than she does. She's going to go down on the second mile, and then it's a medevac and paperwork and somebody's mama calling a senator. That's how this ends. We all know how this ends." "That's enough, Dolan," Mitchell said. But the seed was planted, and around the room the men were nodding because Dolan had said out loud the thing they all believed. She was a liability. She was a photo op. She was somebody's political favor dressed up in a uniform that did not fit her right yet. Emily heard every word. She was standing 3 feet from Dolan, and she heard all of it. And what nobody in that room understood, what none of them could have understood, was that she had heard versions of this speech her entire life. She had heard it from range officers. She had heard it from competition shooters twice her age who could not believe a teenage girl was outscoring them. She had heard it from grown men who laughed when she stepped up to the line and went dead silent when she walked away. The laughter did not touch her anymore. It used to. When she was 12, 13, it used to cut deep. Then her father sat her down one evening after a match where a group of men had made jokes about her the whole day, and he told her something she never forgot. "Emily," he had said, "you are going to spend your whole life being underestimated, and I need you to understand something. Being underestimated is not an insult. It is a gift. It means the other person has already made a mistake before you have even fired a shot. You just have to be disciplined enough to let them make it." She held on to that. She held onto it in that briefing room while a captain with combat ribbons on his chest told her she did not belong. Let them make their mistake. Sir, Emily said, where would you like me to report? Mitchell studied her for a long moment. He had expected tears or anger or begging. He had seen all three from grown men in that room. He had not expected this flat, quiet readiness. It threw him off, and he did not like being thrown off. You want to know where to report, he repeated. Yes, sir. You don't want to argue with me about how you deserve to be here. No, sir. Arguing doesn't hit targets. That one landed. A couple of the men actually stopped grinning. Because that was a shooter's line. That was something you only said if you had spent real hours behind a rifle hours, where you learned that the target does not care about your opinion of yourself. Mitchell noticed it too, and it annoyed him because it meant she might not be completely empty. But he pushed the thought down. Talent behind a rifle was one thing. He had seen plenty of talented shooters wash out of this unit. Talent was cheap. What his men needed was someone who would not get them killed. And he could not look at this girl and believe she would keep his men alive. You report to the barracks, Mitchell said finally. You get 4 hours of rack tomorrow at 0400. You are on the line with everybody else. And I promise you, Miss Carter, we are not going to make this easy on you. I am not going to make it fair. I am going to run you into the dirt because out where we operate, the ground does not care that you are 17. So I would rather find out now on my range where I can control it than find out later where I can't. Understood, sir. You still want to be here? Yes, sir. Mitchell shook his head slowly. Dismissed. Emily picked up her rifle case, picked up her file, and walked out. She did not look at Dolan. She did not look at any of them. And that more than anything was what stayed with the men after she left. She had walked into a room full of the best shooters on the base, taken everything they threw at her, and walked out without giving them a single thing to grab onto. Man, Dolan said, watching the door close. That is a cold little kid. That's not cold, said a quiet voice from the corner. Everyone turned. The voice belonged to Master Sergeant Cole, the oldest operator in the unit, a wiry man with gray in his beard who almost never spoke in briefings. Cole had done things none of the younger men had done in places none of them could find on a map. And when Cole talked, even Mitchell listened. That's not cold, Cole said again. Cold is when you don't feel it. That girl feels every word. She just doesn't spend it. There's a difference, see? And you boys better learn the difference before she's the one covering your six. Dolan laughed. Cole, she's a kid. So were you once, Cole said, and you weren't half that steady. That shut the room up for a second. Then somebody made a joke, and the moment passed, and the men went back to being certain that Emily Carter would be gone by Friday. Cole did not go back to being certain. Cole had watched a lot of people walk into a lot of rooms, and he had learned that the ones who scared you were never the loud ones. The loud ones burned out. The quiet ones were the ones who buried you. He kept that to himself. In the barracks that night, Emily lay on the thin mattress with her eyes open, staring at the ceiling. 4 hours of rack. She would take 2 of them to sleep and use the other 2 to walk the range in her mind the way her father taught her. He used to make her do it before every match. Close your eyes. Walk the course. Feel the wind on your face before you ever get there. By the time your body arrives, he said your mind should already know the whole place. Her father. She let herself think about him for exactly 1 minute. She had a rule about that. 1 minute, and then she put him away because grief behind a rifle made your hands shake, and shaking hands missed. He had taught her that too, though he never meant to. She had watched him miss a shot he never missed the year her mother got sick, and she had understood even as a child that the miss was not about the wind. Sergeant First Class David Carter, 22 years in the Army, one of the finest marksmen the service ever produced, though almost nobody outside a small circle ever knew his name. He did not want them to know it. He used to say the best shooters are the ones you never hear about, because the ones you hear about got famous by making noise, and noise was the last thing a sniper wanted. He had taught her to shoot before she could ride a bike, not because he was pushing her toward the military. He never once told her she should follow him into the service. He taught her because she asked, and because when she picked up a rifle the first time at 7 years old, something in her went quiet and still in a way that startled him. He had seen that stillness before in the very best of the men he served with. He had never expected to see it in his own little girl. You've got it, he told her once when she was maybe 10. I don't know where it came from. Your mother sure doesn't have it, God bless her. She couldn't hit a barn from the inside. But you've got it, and that scares me a little if I'm honest. Why does it scare you, Dad? He was quiet for a while. Because a gift like that comes with a weight, he said. People are going to want things from you because of it, and you're going to have to decide what you'll use it for. Promise me you'll always know why you're pulling the trigger. Not what. Why. You lose the why, you become something I don't want you to be. She had promised. She was 10. She did not fully understand, but she had promised, and she had spent every year since trying to understand what he meant. Then he was gone. She still did not have all the details. The Army did not give families like hers all the details. What she knew was that her father had been called in to help with a rescue operation overseas, that people who were not supposed to be somewhere had been taken, and that men who were very good at their jobs had gone in to bring them home. She knew her father was one of those men. She knew that most of the people came home, and she knew that her father did not. She was 14 when the two officers came to the door. She was standing in the kitchen doing homework, and she saw them through the window walking up the path in their dress uniforms, slow and heavy, the way men walk when they are carrying news that is going to break a house in half. She knew before they knocked. Every military kid knows before they knock. Her mother had already passed by then, the cancer taking her 2 years earlier. So it was just Emily and an aunt she barely knew, and a folded flag and a country's thanks and a hole in the world exactly the shape of the only person who had ever really understood her. She could have stopped shooting then. A lot of people expected her to. The rifle was his. The whole world of it was his. Every trigger pull was a memory of him standing behind her, one hand light on her shoulder, his voice low in her ear. Talk to me about the wind, Em. Talk to me about your breathing. Tell me what you feel. She could have walked away from all of it. Instead, she went out to the range the week after the funeral alone, and she shot until her shoulder was purple and her hands would not close. And somewhere in those hours, she made a decision. She was not going to let the thing he gave her die with him. She was going to carry it. She was going to become the shooter he saw in her when she was 10 years old. Not for glory, not to prove anything to anyone. For him. Because the gift was the last piece of him she still had, and she would rather die than let it rust. That was the why. She never lost it. The men in the Eagle Recon Unit did not know any of this. All they saw was a small, quiet girl who did not belong. They did not know she had spent 3 years training alone in the cold and the dark. They did not know she had won matches under a name that was not quite her own, so the older shooters would not know her age until after they had already lost. They did not know she had studied every scrap of her father's notebooks, hundreds of pages of wind charts and ballistic data, and handwritten notes on how to steady a heart that would not slow down. They would find out, but not tonight. Tonight she closed her eyes, walked the range in her mind, and slept. At 0400, she was on the line before any of them. That was the first thing that got under Dolan's skin. He came out expecting to find an empty spot where the girl should be, expecting to get to say, "I told you so," before the sun even came up. Instead, she was already there, kit squared away, standing at parade rest in the dark, like she had grown out of the ground. "You lost, kid?" Dolan asked. "No, Sergeant. You know we got a 12-mile ruck this morning." "Yes, Sergeant. With full load, same load as everybody else. Captain's not going to lighten your pack because you're small." "I didn't ask him to, Sergeant." Dolan looked at her pack. It was loaded to standard, same weight as his, on a frame twice her size. He did the math in his head, and he did not like the answer, so he laughed instead. "Your funeral," he said. Mitchell came out with the rest of the unit and looked down the line, and his eyes stopped on Emily. He had half expected her to have thought better of it overnight, to have quietly checked out and gone home in the dark where nobody would see her leave. Most of them did when they realized how bad it was going to be. That was the whole point of the first morning. You made it unbearable, and you let the weak ones remove themselves. She had not removed herself. "Carter," Mitchell called. "Sir, you understand that if you fall out on this ruck, that's it. There's no second try. You fall behind, you fail. There's no van coming to pick you up. You want to reconsider. This is the last minute you get to do it." "I'm ready, sir." "You're not," Mitchell said, "but you're going to find that out the hard way." He turned to the unit. "Move out." And they moved. The first 2 miles she stayed in the middle of the pack, and nobody paid much attention to her because the first 2 miles are easy, and everybody looks strong in the first 2 miles. It was the third mile where the trail turned upward and the load started to bite, and the men who talked too much started to talk less. Emily did not talk at all. She had a rhythm. Her father had drilled it into her on long hikes when she was a kid, back when he was teaching her to carry weight before he ever let her carry a rifle any real distance. Small steps uphill, save the big steps for flat ground. Match your breath to your feet. Do not think about the top of the hill. Think about the next step and then the step after that, and let the taunt take care of itself. She did that. Step in breath. Step in breath. She let the pain arrive and she did not fight it. Fighting pain wastes energy. You have to let it in, sit with it, and keep walking. By mile 6, 3 men had fallen out. Grown men experienced operators, guys who had done 100 rucks. The heat and the grade and the pace took them down one by one, and each time one dropped, the others glanced back, half expecting to see the girl on the ground. She was not on the ground. By mile 8, Dolan was hurting. He would not have admitted it under torture, but he was hurting and he was mad about it, and being mad made him burn energy he did not have. He started drifting back through the pack. And around mile 9, in the worst of the heat, he found himself walking next to the one person he had sworn would be long gone by now. He looked over. Emily was pale and drenched, and her jaw was set, and her eyes were fixed 40 feet ahead on the trail. Step and breath, step and breath. She did not look at him. She did not gloat. She did not even seem to notice he was there. That was somehow worse. "You're gonna crash," Dolan said, breathing hard. "You feel strong now? You're gonna crash in the last 2 miles. Everybody does. Everybody who paces like you crashes." Emily said nothing. "You hear me, kid? I hear you, Sergeant. Step and breath. I'm not pacing to feel strong. I'm pacing to finish." Dolan did not have an answer for that. He was pacing to look strong. She was pacing to finish. And somewhere deep down in the part of him that had been a real soldier before he became a loud one, he understood that hers was the better plan. He fell back. She kept walking. At mile 11, Mitchell was watching from a truck that leapfrogged ahead along the route, and he lifted his binoculars and counted his people, and then he counted again because the count was wrong. It was wrong in a way that did not make sense. The girl was not in the back where he expected. The girl was not even in the middle. The girl was in the front third of the pack, and she was gaining. "That's not possible," Mitchell said to no one. Cole was in the truck with him. Cole did not lift his binoculars. He did not need to. "It's possible," Cole said. "She's 17, Cole. She weighs a buck, 15 soaking wet. She's carrying the same load as Dolan, and Dolan is a beast." "Dolan's a beast for a mile," Cole said. Man. She's built different. Look how she's walking. She's not wasting anything. Watch her hands, they're relaxed. Watch her breathing. Every man out there that is fighting the ruck. She made peace with it back at the trailhead." Mitchell lowered the binoculars and looked at Cole. "You knew," he said, "yesterday in the briefing. You knew." "I didn't know," Cole said. "I suspected. There's a way certain people carry themselves. You've seen it. You just haven't seen it in a kid before, so you didn't recognize it." Mitchell did not answer. He lifted the binoculars again and watched a 17-year-old girl pass a man who had spent 11 years in special operations, and for the first time since her file crossed his desk, a very small and very unwelcome thought crept into his mind. What if I'm wrong about her? He pushed it down. One ruck did not make a soldier. Anybody could grind out one ruck on adrenaline and spite. He had seen guys crush the first event and quit the second. He had seen it 100 times. The ruck meant nothing, but he kept the binoculars up, and he watched her the rest of the way in. She finished in the top 10. Out of a unit of hardened operators, she finished 10th, and 8 of the 9 ahead of her looked ready to collapse, and she did not look ready to collapse. She looked ready to do it again. She crossed the finish, set her pack down without dropping it, drank exactly the right amount of water, not too much, and stood at the edge of the group waiting for the next order. She did not celebrate. She did not look for anyone's face to see if they were impressed. She just stood there present and ready, and that steadiness said more than any celebration could have. The men who had finished ahead of her did not say anything to her, but they did not laugh either. And the ones who had fallen out on the trail, who came limping in behind her long after she was done, they had nothing to say at all. Dolan finished 20th. He walked past her without a word. His whole plan for the day, the running joke about the kid, the medevac, He had promised it had all fallen apart, and he did not know what to do with that. So he did nothing. Mitchell watched all of it from the truck. Then he climbed down, walked over to where Emily stood and looked at her for a long moment. 10th, he said. Yes, sir. You know why I don't care that you finished 10th? No, sir. Because rucking isn't shooting, and shooting isn't fighting, and fighting isn't leading, and this unit needs all four. You're 1 for 4, Carter. That's nothing. That's less than nothing. That's a girl who can walk fast. Emily nodded slowly. Then I guess I have 3 more to prove, sir. Mitchell almost smiled. He caught it before it happened and turned it into something harder. But it had been there for half a second, and Cole saw it, and Cole knew that whatever Mitchell told himself, the wall had a crack in it now. Precision range, Mitchell said, loud enough for the whole unit to hear. 1,400 hours. Carter, you're going to shoot against my best, not the average, the best. And when you miss, and you will miss, I want every man here to see it. Because talent on a range in a magazine is one thing. Talent on my range against my shooters in my wind, that's another thing entirely. He turned to the rest of them. Get cleaned up, eat. We shoot this afternoon. The men filed off. Dolan lingered a moment looking back at Emily, and this time when he spoke, there was less mockery in it and more something that was almost a warning. He means it, Dolan said. About the best. He's putting you up against Reyes. Reyes doesn't miss. Reyes has been shooting longer than you've been alive. Okay, Emily said. You're not nervous. I don't have time to be nervous, Sergeant. I have to eat and check my rifle. Dolan stared at her. Then he shook his head and walked off, and for the first time he did not laugh when he left her. He just walked quiet the way a man walks when the ground he was standing on turns out to be less solid than he thought. Emily went to check her rifle. It was her father's rifle, or it had been. She had rebuilt it herself over 3 years, replaced parts, tuned it, made it hers, but the core of it, the soul of it, was his. She ran her hands over it, the way he had taught her, checking everything, feeling everything. A rifle tells you if something is wrong, he used to say, but only if you know it well enough to hear it. The rifle told her nothing was wrong. It was ready. It was always ready. She was the variable. The rifle was never the variable. She thought about Reyes as she cleaned. She did not know Reyes, but she knew the type. Older shooter, long experience, deep confidence. The kind of man who had beaten everyone put in front of him for so long that he had stopped believing anyone could beat him. That confidence was a strength and it was a weakness. It made Reyes steady. It also made Reyes certain. And her father had a saying about certainty. Certainty is where good shooters go to miss. She did not need to beat Reyes to win the afternoon. She understood that clearly even at 17. She needed to be undeniable. She needed to shoot in a way that made it impossible for any man on that line to keep telling himself the story he had told himself since she walked in. That was the real target, not the paper downrange. The story in their heads. She finished with the rifle. She ate. She sat by herself in the shade and she closed her eyes and she walked the range in her mind, and in her mind she heard her father's voice low and calm, the way she always heard it before she shot. Talk to me about the wind, Em. She breathed out slowly. I've got the wind, Dad. At 1,400 hours, she walked to the line and every man in the Eagle Recon unit was there to watch her fail. They were not going to get what they came for. But none of them knew that yet. Reyes was already at the line when she got there. He was exactly what she had pictured. Lean, weathered, calm, a man in his 40s with the flat, unbothered eyes of someone who had done this 10,000 times. He looked at Emily the way you look at a formality, something you have to get through before you can go back to your afternoon. You're the kid, Reyes said. Yes. They tell you who I am. They told me you don't miss. Reyes shrugged, not bragging, just stating a fact he had lived with for years. Not often, he said. Look, I'm not going to be a jerk to you like some of these guys. You showed something on that ruck, I'll give you that. But this is my whole life. This one thing. I've been doing this since before you were born, so don't feel bad when it goes the way it's going to go, okay? It was almost kind. That was the thing. Reyes was not being cruel. He genuinely felt a little sorry for her, and he was trying to soften the landing in advance. And that in its own way was the deepest underestimation of all, because it came from a good place and it was completely certain, and certainty is where good shooters go to miss. Okay, Emily said, and she meant it. She did not need Reyes to believe in her. She only needed the paper downrange, and the paper downrange did not care what Reyes believed. Mitchell stepped up beside them. The wind was moving across the range, gusting, changing direction. the way mountain wind does the hardest wind there is to read. He had chosen the time on purpose. He had chosen the distance on purpose. He had stacked everything against her that he could stack, and he told himself it was fair because the enemy would stack everything against her too, and better she break here than out there. 10 rounds, Mitchell said, rotating targets, increasing distance. Whoever's got the tighter group and the more hits wins. Reyes goes first. Carter, you watch him shoot. Learn something before you embarrass yourself. Emily watched Reyes shoot. He was good. He was better than good. He read the wind well, and his group was tight, and out of 10 rounds, he dropped only one, and even the one he dropped was close. The men murmured their approval. This was their guy. This was the standard. A 17-year-old was not going to touch that, and now everyone had seen the standard, and everyone was ready to watch her come up short of it. Reyes stepped back and gave Emily a small nod that was almost gentle. Good luck, kid. You'll be fine. Emily stepped up to the line. She lay down behind the rifle. She settled into it the way you settle into something you have known your whole life. Her breathing slowed. Her heart, which had every right to be pounding, slowed with it because she had trained it to for years in the cold and the dark, alone. Somewhere behind her, Dolan opened his mouth to say something. Cole put a hand on his arm. Watch, Cole said quietly. Just watch. Emily did not hear either of them. She was somewhere else now. She was on a range in her mind that she had built out of 10,000 hours with her father's voice in her ear, and the wind was talking to her, and she was listening. Talk to me about the wind, Em. She felt it on her cheek. She read the grass downrange the way it bent and released. She read the mirage shimmering over the ground. She read all of it in about 4 seconds faster than most of the men on that line could have done it, and she made her adjustment, and she let her breath out halfway, and she waited for the pause between heartbeats. And in the pause, she fired. The men were still expecting her to miss. They kept expecting it right up until the moment they stopped. The confirmation came back down the line, one target at a time, and the range officer's voice cracked as he read it because he had read a lot of scorecards in his years, and he had never once read one like this. 10 for 10, the officer said, then quieter like he did not quite believe his own mouth. 10 for 10, and the group's inside Reyes. Nobody said anything. That was the sound Emily would remember from that afternoon. Not applause, not cheering, silence. The particular silence of a dozen men who had walked out to a range absolutely certain of something, and who had just watched that certainty die in front of them, and who now had no idea what to do with their faces. Reyes stood behind her, and Reyes did not move for a long time. He was staring downrange at the two groups side by side, his and hers, and his was the group of a man who had been shooting since before she was born, and hers was tighter. Not by much, but tighter, in worse wind, on her first attempt, at 17. He had told her not to feel bad when it went the way it was going to go. It had not gone the way he thought it was going to go. Where, Reyes said, his voice was strange. Where did you learn to read wind like that? That mirage was garbage today. I've been shooting this range for 6 years and I barely held that. Where does a kid learn that? Emily stood up slowly from behind the rifle. She was careful with it the way she was always careful with it, and she set the safety and she checked it clear before she answered him, because her father had taught her that a rifle is not a prop, and you handle it right even when the whole world is staring at you. My dad, she said. Your dad, the shoot competition? My dad shot for the Army, Emily said, for a long time. Reyes looked at her differently then. He had spent his whole life around shooters, and he knew there was a kind of skill that only came from one place. From years of a certain kind of hands guiding certain kinds of hands, from a lineage you could not fake and could not buy. He had just watched it, and now he understood where it came from. He teach you that pause, Reyes asked. That thing you did right at the end there, that little hold between heartbeats. Yes. That's not a thing you teach a kid, Reyes said almost to himself. That's a thing you teach a shooter. He must have thought a lot of you. Emily did not answer that one. She could not answer that one, not there, not with all those men watching, because there was a thing behind her ribs that would break open if she tried to talk about how much her father had thought of her, and she wasn't going to let it break open on a firing line. So she just looked at Reyes, and Reyes, who had underestimated her in the kindest possible way, saw something in her eyes that made him stop asking. All right, Reyes said quietly. He stuck out his hand. That's the best I've been beat in a long time, maybe ever. You earned it. She shook his hand. And that handshake did something in that unit that no scorecard could have done because Reyes was respected. Reyes did not give false praise. Reyes had never in anyone's memory told a person they had beaten him. When Reyes shook her hand and said she earned it, the story every man had been telling himself since Monday came apart at the seams. All except one. Captain Mitchell had watched the whole thing without a word. He had watched her shoot. He had heard the score. He had seen Reyes shake her hand. And the crack in his wall that Cole had noticed on the ruck rope was wider now, wide enough that he could feel the cold coming through it. And he hated it because a man does not like to feel his own certainty leaking out of him in front of the people he commands. So he did what men like Mitchell do when they feel that. He reached for the one thing he still had. Good shooting, Mitchell said. His voice was flat. Real good shooting. Emily turned to face him. Thank you, sir. 2 for 4 now, Mitchell said. Shooting and rucking. That's 2. He let that sit a second. You know what that scorecard tells me, Carter? It tells me you can hit a piece of paper that isn't shooting back. It tells me you can hit a target that stands still and waits for you and doesn't have a wife and 2 kids and a plan to put a round through your chest. It's a good trick, but it's a trick on a range. And I have buried men who could shoot better than that. The words landed hard and they were meant to. A few of the men shifted uncomfortable now because the shooting had been undeniable and Mitchell was trying to deny it anyway, and some of them were starting to feel the wrongness of that. But Emily did not flinch. She had been waiting for this. She had known from the first morning that the shooting alone would never be enough for a man like Mitchell. Her father had warned her about exactly this. There will always be one M, one who can't let it go, and you can't beat that one with a rifle. You beat that one by being right when it counts. You're not wrong, sir, Emily said. That surprised him. He had expected her to defend herself. She was agreeing with him. Paper doesn't shoot back, she went on. I know that. I've never been in a fight. I'm not going to stand here and tell you I have. So test me on the thing I haven't proven. Test me on the fight. Put me in the field and see if I fold. She paused. But respectfully, sir, don't tell me the shooting was a trick. Master Sergeant Reyes has been doing this longer than I've been alive, and he just shook my hand. You can decide I'm not ready. That's your call. But you can't decide the shooting didn't happen. Everybody here watched it happen. The line went dead silent again, because she had done something almost no one ever did to Mitchell. She had agreed with the true part of what he said and refused the false part calmly without heat, and she had done it in front of the entire unit. She had handed him his own argument back cleaned up with the lie taken out of it. Dolan of all people made a small sound in his throat. It was not a laugh this time. It was closer to respect. He caught himself, but he had already made it, and a couple of the men heard it. Mitchell stared at her. He was a good enough leader underneath everything to know when he had been beaten in front of his people, and he had just been beaten. And the worst part was that she had done it so respectfully that he could not even be angry about it without looking small. She had left him a way out. She had said it's your call. She had given him the room to keep his authority. And that was almost worse because it meant she had thought about his pride before he had thought about her skill. Fine, Mitchell said finally. You want the field, you'll get the field. Mission simulation 48 hours from now. Full scenario. And Carter, I promise you the field is where the trick stops working. The field is where the ones like you find out that being able to shoot is the smallest part of the job. Understood, sir. We'll see if you understand, Mitchell said, and he walked off the line. Cole watched him go. Then he walked over to where Emily stood still holding her rifle, and he looked at her for a moment with those old flat eyes that had seen everything. You handled that right, Cole said. Both parts, the shooting and the talking. The talking was harder, and you handled it better. He nodded toward Mitchell's back. You know why he's like that with you. He thinks I'll get somebody killed, Emily said. He knows he lost men, Cole said. 4 of them. He was the commander. You lose men as a commander, part of you decides it was because you weren't hard enough on people before you took them out there. So now he's hard on everybody, especially the ones he can't figure out. You're the one he can't figure out. Cole studied her. Don't take it personal, and don't try to win him over. He can't be won over. He can only be proven wrong, and even then it'll take him a while to admit it. Just do the job. Let the job do the arguing. That's what my dad used to say, Emily said quietly. Let the job do the arguing. Cole looked at her a beat longer. Your dad, he said. Carter. That's not a common name, but it's not rare either. Army marksman, you said. Rescue operation overseas. He was watching her face very carefully now. What was his first name? Something in Emily went still. David, she said. Cole did not move. For a long moment, the old man just looked at her, and something crossed his face that she could not read. Something that went down deep and came from far away. And his jaw worked once like he was chewing on a word he did not want to say. David Carter, Cole said. You knew him, Emily said. It was not a question. She could see it now in the way the old man had gone gray around the edges. I need to check my gear, Cole said abruptly, and he turned and walked off the range. And he did not look back, and Emily stood there holding her father's rifle with her heart suddenly pounding in a way that no shooting had ever made it pound. He knew her father. Cole knew her father. And whatever Cole knew, it had put a look on that hard old face that she had never seen on it before, and he had walked away from it rather than say it out loud. She wanted to go after him. Every part of her wanted to go after him and grab his sleeve and say, tell me what you know, tell me what that look was. But she did not, because her father had taught her patience. And patience said that a man who walks away from a thing that hard is a man who is not ready to say it, and pushing him would only close the door harder. So she let him go, but she filed it away. Cole knew something, and she was going to find out what it was. That was the first crack in a story Emily thought she understood completely. She did not know it yet, but her father's death was not going to stay in the neat folded flag-shaped box the Army had given her family. Something was going to come out of it, and the old man walking away from her across the range was the first threat of it. That night, the unit ate together, and for the first time since she arrived, Emily was not eating alone. It started small. Reyes sat down across from her with his tray, which was not a big thing except that Reyes was the standard, and where Reyes sat, other men noticed. Then a young operator named Torres sat down a guy about 25 with an easy grin, and Torres was the kind of person who could not stand a silence. So, Torres said, that was insane what you did today. I've watched Reyes shoot for 2 years, and I've never seen anybody make him do that face. He made the face. Did you see the face? I saw the face, Emily said. I did not make a face, Reyes said. You made the face. Torres and Emily said at the same time, and Torres laughed so hard he nearly knocked his tray over, and just like that, something loosened at that table, something that had been clenched tight around her since Monday. It did not loosen everywhere. Down at the far end of the room, Dolan sat with a couple of the older guys, and he was not laughing, and he kept glancing over at the table where the kid was, suddenly the center of everything. Dolan had built his whole week around being the guy who called it the guy who saw through her, and now she had beaten the ruck, and she had beaten Reyes, and here she was making Torres laugh, and Dolan was watching his own story fall apart in real time, and men like Dolan do not fall apart quietly. She got lucky on the win, Dolan said loud enough to Carrie. Everybody keeps forgetting the field. Captain's right. The field's gonna eat her alive. The table went a little quieter. Torres started to say something, but Emily put a hand on his arm gently and shook her head. Not here. Not with words. He might be right, Emily said loud enough for Dolan to hear. I've never been in the field. He has. Maybe he'll teach me something out there. It took the wind right out of Dolan. He had loaded up for a fight, and she had refused to give him one, and worse, she had called him experienced in front of everyone, which made his own hostility look petty by comparison. He opened his mouth, closed it, went back to his food. Torres leaned in. You're kind of scary, you know that. You didn't even raise your voice, and you just disarmed him. My dad, Emily said, used to say you never win a fight, you can walk around. Your dad sounds like a smart guy. Something flickered across Emily's face. He was. Torres caught the was, and to his credit, the kid was smart enough not to poke at it. He just nodded and let it go and changed the subject, and for that small kindness, Emily liked him immediately. But across the room, someone else had caught the was too. Cole was sitting alone near the door, not eating much, and he was watching Emily the whole meal with those old eyes. And when she said, was something moved behind his face again? She did not miss it. She had been watching for him, and their eyes met across the room just for a second, and in that second, an understanding passed between them, unspoken and heavy. He knew she had questions. She knew he had answers, and neither of them was ready. That was the 10-minute mark of the evening, and it was the quietest, most loaded thing that happened all night, two people looking at each other across a room, both carrying a piece of the same dead man, neither one able to say his name out loud. Cole got up and left first. The next morning was the last full day before the field exercise, and Mitchell used it to run them ragged. Land navigation, casualty carries, room clearing drills over and over until their hands ached. He watched Emily through all of it, waiting for the field skills to be where she was weak, waiting for the moment where the range trick stopped working and the girl fell apart. The moment did not come. Not because Emily was some natural at everything. She was not. She was slower than the men on the casualty carries because she was small, and she knew it, and she made up for it by being smarter about her technique, by using leverage instead of muscle the way her father had taught her to do everything work smarter than the bigger person. On the room clearing, she was raw. She had never done it, but she learned faster than anyone had ever seen a rookie learn because she did the thing almost no rookie does. She watched. She watched the good ones. She copied exactly what they did, and she did not let her ego make her do it her own way before she had earned the right to. Torres noticed it first. "You're stealing my footwork," he said, half joking during a water break. "You clear a corner better than anybody here," Emily said. "So yes, I'm stealing your footwork. Is that a problem?" Torres looked genuinely touched. "No," he said. "Nobody ever said I was the best at anything before." "You're the best at that," Emily said simply, "so I'm learning it from you." And there it was again, the thing she did without seeming to try, the thing that was slowly turning the unit around one man at a time. She made people better by seeing them. Dolan had spent the week trying to make her small. Emily spent the week making everyone else feel large, and the difference in those two approaches was starting to show in whose direction the unit was drifting. Even the older guys who had sided with Dolan were coming around. One of them, a quiet operator named Briggs, pulled her aside during the drills and showed her a better way to hold her weapon on the move unprompted, just because. And when Dolan gave Briggs a look for it later, Briggs shrugged. "She listens," Briggs said. "You know how rare that is in a new guy? She actually listens. I'm not going to punish a kid for being coachable just because you got your feelings hurt on the range." Dolan did not have an answer for that either. He was running out of allies and he could feel it, and it was making him meaner. That afternoon, the meanness found its opening. They were doing a stress drill, the kind where the instructors yell and pile on chaos to see who cracks, and Dolan had positioned himself as one of the men running the scenario, which meant he got to be one of the voices in Emily's ear. And he used it. He got right up next to her, and he did not yell about the drill. He went for the thing he thought would actually cut. "You think you belong here," Dolan said low and hard right in her ear while she was trying to work the problem. "You think one lucky range day means you belong. Guys with 10 times your experience have died out there. Real soldiers. And you show up with your daddy's rifle thinking you're going to do what they couldn't. You're going to get somebody killed, kid. You're going to get one of us killed, and you're going to have to live with it, and no amount of trick shooting is going to fix that." He said the word daddy on purpose. He had heard there was at dinner. He had put it together that her father was gone, and he had decided to use it, and that was the lowest thing anyone had done to her all week. Emily's hands did not shake. Her breathing did not change. She finished the drill. She hit every mark. And when the drill was called and the noise stopped, she stood up and she turned to Dolan, and she looked at him with an expression that was not anger. It was worse than anger. It was pity. "You knew my dad was gone," Emily said quietly, just to him so no one else could hear. "And you used it to try to rattle me during a drill. That's the part you should think about tonight, Sergeant. Not whether I belong, whether you'd want the men on this team to know you did that." Then she walked away. She did not report him. She did not make a scene. She just left him standing there with what he had done, and that was the heaviest punishment she could possibly have given a man who still underneath all the noise thought of himself as a soldier with a code. Dolan stood there for a long time. That was the 25-minute turn of the day, and it did not look like a turn. It looked like nothing, a girl walking away from a big man. But something had happened in Dolan in that moment. Some old dead part of him had opened one eye, and though he would spend the next day pretending it had not, and it had. That evening, Cole came to find her. She was sitting outside by herself, cleaning her rifle in the last of the light, doing the thing that steadied her more than anything else in the world, and she heard the old man's footsteps, and she knew who it was before she looked up. "Master Sergeant," she said. "Carter." Cole lowered himself down to sit near her, slow the way old operators sit every joint, remembering every mile. He watched her work the rifle for a while, watched her hands, and there was something in his face like a man looking at a ghost. "You do that just like him," Cole said finally, "the way you check the bolt." He did it exactly like that, twice, always, twice, even when once was enough. Emily's hands went still on the rifle. "You did know him," she said, "really know him." "I served with your father for 11 years, Cole said. "Off and on, different assignments, but our paths kept crossing the way they do with guys who do a certain kind of work. David Carter was the best rifle I ever stood next to, and I stood next to a lot of them." He was quiet a moment. "He talked about you, you know that, all the time. Had a picture of you shooting, must have been 10, 11 years old, little kid behind a rifle way too big for her. He'd show it to anybody who'd look. Said his girl was going to be better than him someday." Cole's voice caught just slightly. Looks like he was right. Emily could not speak. Her throat had closed completely. She had spent 3 years caring for her father almost entirely alone, and now here was a man who had known him, who had stood beside him, who had seen the picture of her that her father carried, and it was too much and not enough all at once. "I didn't know," she managed. "I didn't know anyone here served with him." "Nobody did," Cole said. "I saw your file 2 days ago. Saw the name. Wasn't sure until you told me his first name on the range." He paused and his face changed, and here was the thing he had walked away from here was what had put the gray look on him. "Emily, there's something you should probably know, and I've been going back and forth all day on whether it's my place to tell you. But you're going out to the field tomorrow, and if something's going to knock you sideways, I'd rather it be tonight with me than out there where it can get somebody hurt." Emily set the rifle down completely. Her heart was pounding again, that same wrong pounding from the range. "Tell me," she said. Cole was quiet for a long, long moment. When he spoke, he chose every word carefully. "The operation your father died on," Cole said. "The rescue. You know the basics. People got taken, a team went in. Most of them came home, your dad didn't." He looked at her. "Do you know who was on that team, Emily?" "No," she said. "The Army never gave us names, just that he died bringing people home." Cole nodded slowly like that was what he had feared. "He did bring them home," Cole said. "Every single hostage came home alive. Your father made that happen. He held an overwatch position that let the assault element get in and out clean. He held it longer than he should have. He held it after he was hit so the last 2 people could get clear. That's not a story the Army tells families because the Army doesn't like to say a man held a position after he was hit. But that's what happened. He chose to stay. He chose to keep shooting so strangers could live." Cole's voice was rough now. He was covering the withdrawal. "And the man he was covering, the team leader, he bought time for the one who got out because your father stayed." Cole stopped. He could not seem to finish it. "Who?" Emily whispered. "Who was it, Cole?" Cole looked at her, and the old man's eyes were wet now, and his voice when it came out was barely a voice at all. "It was Ryan Mitchell," Cole said. The world tilted. Emily did not move. She could not move. She sat there in the last of the light with her father's rifle beside her and her heart slamming against her ribs, and she stared at Cole, and she waited for the words to rearrange themselves into something that made sense, and they would not. "Captain Mitchell," she said. Her voice did not sound like her own. "Captain Mitchell was on my father's last mission." "He was the ground force commander," Cole said heavily. "Your father was his overwatch, and your father died keeping Mitchell and the rest of them alive." He shook his head. "Emily, I don't think Mitchell knows who you are. Carter's a common enough name. He never met you, and I don't think anybody's connected it for him and. But that man out there who's been riding you all week, who told you the shooting was a trick, who's sending you to the field to break you." Cole's jaw tightened. "He's alive because your father died for him. And he doesn't have the first idea that the kid he's been trying to run off is the daughter of the man who saved his life." Emily stared out into the dark. 3 years she had carried the neat folded flag-shaped box. 3 years she had told herself the story the Army gave her, a man died bringing people home, honorable clean over. And now the box was open, and inside it was not clean, and it was not over. It was a name, and the name belonged to the man who had thrown her file in the trash on Monday. "Does he know how my dad died?" she asked. "The details. That he held the position after he was hit." "He knows," Cole said quietly. "A man doesn't forget who covered his withdrawal. Mitchell carries it. I've watched him carry it for 3 years. It's part of why he's the way he is, Emily. It's part of why he's so hard on everybody. He decided he wasn't hard enough. He wasn't ready enough, and good men paid for it. Your father, most of all. Cole looked at her. He doesn't know he's punishing that man's daughter, but he's been punishing himself with that man's death every single day since it happened. Emily closed her eyes. Everything looked different now. The flat hardness in Mitchell's voice, the way he talked about burying men, the way he said the field is where the ones like you find out. It was not about her. It had never been about her. It was about the ghost he carried the Overwatch who stayed too long, the man whose daughter was now sitting on his base cleaning that same man's rifle, and he did not even know it. I have to decide, Emily said slowly, whether to tell him. Yes, Cole said. You do, and that's why I told you tonight instead of after the field. Because that's your decision, and it's a heavy one, and I wasn't going to let you make it out there in the middle of a scenario with no warning. He put a hand on her shoulder the first time the old man had touched her, and it was heavy and gentle at once. For what it's worth, I don't know what the right answer is. Telling him might break him. Not telling him might break you. I've turned it over all day, and I don't have it figured out. He squeezed her shoulder once. But you needed to know. You had a right to know whose life your father traded his for. He got up slowly, every joint complaining, and he stood over her a moment. Your dad would be real proud of you, Emily, Cole said. Real proud, and not for the shooting, for how you carried yourself this week, for walking away from Dolan instead of burning him down, for the way you talked to Mitchell on the line, giving him a way out even while you were beating him. That's not shooting. That's the other thing your dad had, the thing that made men follow him into places they had no business going. He nodded mostly to himself. You've got both. He'd be proud. I'm glad I got to tell you that. Then Cole walked back inside and left Emily alone in the dark with her father's rifle and her father's ghost and a truth so heavy she did not know how she was going to carry it into tomorrow. She sat out there for a long time. She thought about her father on that last mission. Hit choosing to stay, choosing to keep firing so that strangers could go home to their families. She thought about the neat lie she had lived inside for 3 years and how it had never once in all that time told her that some of those strangers had names and that one of the names was the man who signed her assignment and threw her file in the trash. And she thought about the decision Cole had handed her, the terrible, impossible decision. She could walk into Mitchell's office tomorrow and say 4 words, I'm David Carter's daughter, and watch the hardest man she had ever met come apart in front of her. She could use it. She could end his hostility in a single sentence. No man alive could keep riding the daughter of the man who died so he could live. But her father's voice was in her ear again, the way it always was, low and calm, and asking the same question he had always asked. Not what why. If she told Mitchell tomorrow, she would be doing it to make her own week easier. To win, to end the hostility, she would be using her father's death as a weapon, cashing it in to buy herself a smoother path. And her father had held that Overwatch position after he was hit, not so his daughter could someday cash in his sacrifice for an easier ride. He had done it because it was the job, because strangers needed to go home, because that was who he was. If she was going to earn her place in this unit, she was going to earn it as a shooter and a soldier, not as a dead man's daughter collecting on a debt Mitchell did not even know he owed. She made her decision out there in the dark alone, the way she had made every hard decision since she was 14. She was not going to tell him, not tomorrow, not to win the field exercise, not to end the hostility. She was going to walk into that scenario, and she was going to prove herself on her own, with her own hands as Emily Carter, and nothing else. And if there ever came a day to tell Ryan Mitchell, whose daughter he had been trying to break, it would be a day she chose for the right reason. Not a day she reached for because she was tired of being doubted. She picked up her father's rifle. She checked the bolt. Twice always, twice even when once was enough, exactly the way he had done it, exactly the way Cole had watched her do it and seen a ghost. Okay, Dad, she whispered into the dark. Tomorrow it's just me, just like you taught me, and I'm not going to use you to do it. She could almost hear him answer. That's my girl. That's the why. She went inside and she slept better than she had all week, because a person always sleeps better once they have decided who they are going to be. And out there in the dark, in a quarters he shared with no one, Captain Ryan Mitchell lay awake the way he lay awake most nights, staring at a ceiling he could not see, listening to a name he could not stop hearing, the name of an Overwatch who had stayed too long on a rooftop 3 years ago and bought Mitchell's life with his own. He did not know that the man's daughter was asleep 2 buildings away. He did not know that tomorrow he was going to send her into a scenario designed to break her. And he did not know that everything he believed about strength and weakness and who deserved to stand in his unit was about to be turned completely inside out by a 17-year-old girl who had already decided she would rather earn his respect the hard way than take the shortcut her father's grave would have given her. The field exercise was at dawn. None of them, not Mitchell, not Dolan, not even Emily, understood yet how much it was going to focus or how much it was going to change. Dawn came gray and cold, and the unit assembled in the dark exactly the way they had for the ruck. Except this time, nobody was laughing at the girl on the end of the line, and that silence told its own story about how far the week had come. Mitchell walked the formation with a tablet in his hand and read the scenario off flat the way he read everything. A simulated hostage recovery in mountain terrain, a hidden threat somewhere in the exercise box, an objective to reach, and a team to keep intact getting there. Live role players scattered through the hills to make it real laser gear on every weapon to score every hit and every miss. Communications would be intermittent by design because the mountains ate radio signals, and Mitchell wanted them to know what it felt like when the comms died and you were on your own. "Carter," Mitchell said, stopping in front of her, "you're on the assault element, not Overwatch. I know shooting's your thing. That's exactly why you're not doing it today. Today I want to see if you can move with a team, think with a team, and not get anybody killed when you can't just lie down behind a rifle and be the star." He let that sit. "You understand what I'm telling you?" "Yes, sir," Emily said. "You want to see me do the part I haven't proven?" "I want to see you fail at it," Mitchell said, and there it was, the flat hardness. And Emily heard it completely differently now than she had 2 days ago, because now she knew what was underneath it. Now she knew that this man was alive because her father was not. Now she knew that every hard word he threw at her came out of a wound he did not know he was showing her. She looked at him for a moment longer than she needed to. She could have said it right then. 4 words. It would have ended everything. She did not say it. "Understood, sir," she said instead. And she meant it, and Cole, standing 3 men down, saw her make the choice not to speak and gave a single small nod that nobody else caught. They moved out into the hills as the light came up. For the first hour, it went the way these things go. The team moved well. Torres was on point, and he was good at it, reading the ground, calling the pace. Reyes had the Overwatch slot that Emily would have wanted up, high, and behind, and it was strange for her to be down in the assault element instead of up in the glass. But she made herself present where she was moving with the team, watching the team, learning the rhythm of how these men work together under load. And she watched the ground. That was the thing. She could not turn off the thing 3 years of solitary training had burned into her. Even walking in the assault element with a job that was not about observation, she could not stop observing. Her father had trained her to see the hills the way a predator sees them, to notice the place where the terrain does not add up, the shadow that sits wrong, the line of ground a smart enemy would choose. It was not a skill she could switch off. It was just how her eyes worked now. So at the 90-minute mark, when the team was moving through a draw between 2 ridgelines and everyone else was watching their sector and minding their spacing, Emily was the one who saw it. It was nothing. It was less than nothing. It was a patch of ground on the high ridge to the north where the vegetation sat slightly differently than the vegetation around it. A subtle wrongness, a place where something had been disturbed and then made to look undisturbed by someone who was good, but not quite good enough. She stopped. "Hold," Emily said, quiet but firm into the team net. "Hold. Northridge high, that terrace of brush. Something's up there." The team slowed. Torres keyed back. "I got nothing on the Northridge. What are you seeing, Carter Baum?" "The brush is wrong," Emily said. "That whole terrace. Somebody worked it and tried to cover the work. That's a firing position. If I were setting an ambush in this draw, that's exactly where I'd put my Overwatch. It's got line of sight down the whole length of this draw and a covered withdrawal behind the ridgeline." There was a pause on the net. And then Dolan's voice came through, and Dolan was in the assault element too. And Dolan had spent 2 days watching his standing in this unit erode. And Dolan heard a rookie stop the whole team on a hunch and he saw in that moment the last chance he was going to get to be right about her. It's brush, Dolan said flatly. It's a ridge full of brush. That's what ridges have on them, Carter. Brush. We are on a clock, and we are not going to stop the whole element because the kid got spooked by a bush. He keyed to Torres. Torres, we're burning time. Keep moving. She's jumping at shadows. First time out in the field, everybody sees ghosts. It's normal, but we don't stop the mission for it. And here was the moment. Here was the whole week, the whole scenario compressed into 10 seconds on a radio net. A rookie who saw something, a veteran who did not, and a team that had to decide right now who's red to trust. Torres hesitated. He was on point. It was his call as much as anyone's, and he was caught between the rookie who had beaten Reyes and the veteran who had 11 years in, and he did not know which way to go. And the clock was running, and Mitchell was somewhere watching all of it and scoring all of it. Carter, Torres said, you're sure? You're actually sure, because Dolan's not wrong that we're on a clock, and if we hold the whole element and there's nothing up there that's on the record too. Emily did not hesitate. This was the thing her father had prepared her for her entire life, the moment where you have read the ground correctly and everyone around you is telling you that you are wrong, and you have to decide whether to trust the doubt in their voices or the truth in your own eyes. I'm sure, Emily said. I'm not asking you to take my word. Send one man up the reverse slope quiet and look at that terrace from behind. If I'm wrong, we lost 5 minutes. If I'm right and we walk this draw, that position kills half the element before we even know we're being shot at. 5 minutes against half the team. That's the trade. It was the perfect argument, and every man on the net knew it because she had not made it about her being right. She had made it about the cost of being wrong in each direction. 5 minutes versus half the team. Nobody could argue with the math. Nobody except Dolan. There's nobody up there, Dolan said. And there was something desperate in it now. Something that had stopped being about the mission and become about him, about his standing, about the story he had staked his whole week on. I'm telling you, as the senior man on this element, keep moving. And then a new voice came onto the net. Flat, cold, unmistakable. This is Mitchell. He had been listening to the whole thing. I'm not making this call for you. You've got a rookie who says hold and a senior operator who says move. That's exactly the kind of call that gets made out there for real when I'm not on the net to save you. So you make it. Torres, you're on point. It's your element. What are you going to do? The silence on that net lasted maybe 4 seconds. It felt like an hour. Torres made his choice. Briggs, Torres said, take the reverse slope, quiet. Eyes on that terrace from behind. Everybody else hold and take cover. We wait for Briggs. A beat. Carter, if you're wrong, you're buying my beer for a month. If I'm wrong, Emily said, I'll buy it for a year. Briggs peeled off and worked his way up the back of the North Ridge slow and low, and the whole element held its breath in the draw, and Dolan sat there with his jaw clenched, silently praying to be right, praying that Briggs would come over the top and find an empty ridge full of nothing but brush. 2 minutes passed, the longest 2 minutes of the exercise. Then Briggs came onto the net, and his voice was different, low and tight and careful. Contact, Briggs whispered. Confirmed. 2 role players in a prepared position on that terrace, exactly where Carter called it. Concealed camouflage laser gear hot. They've got the whole draw ranged. I'm looking down at them right now, and they have no idea I'm here. A pause. Carter was dead right. If we'd walked that draw, they'd have lit up the entire element. This is a kill box. She just saved the whole team. The net went silent. And in that silence, everything Dolan had built collapsed. Because it was one thing to lose a ruck to the kid. One thing to lose a range to the kid. Those were skills, and Dolan could tell himself skills did not matter in the field. But this was the field. This was the exact thing Dolan had said she could not do, the exact thing Mitchell had sent her out here to fail at. And she had not just done it, she had done it better than any man on the element. And she had done it over Dolan's loud, insistent senior objection. She had been right, and he had been wrong on the record in front of the commander, in the one arena where he had sworn she could not touch him. Good hold, Carter, Torres said, and there was something like awe in it. Good hold. Briggs, can you take that position? I can take it, Briggs said. They're focused down into the draw. They never expected somebody behind them. Give me 30 seconds. Briggs took the position. Two role players tapped out laser gear, buzzing their kills, and just like that, the ambush that would have destroyed the element was gone, taken from behind, because a 17-year-old had trusted her own eyes over the loudest voice in the unit. Somewhere on a ridge overlooking the whole exercise, Captain Mitchell lowered his binoculars and did not say a single word. Cole was next to him. Cole had asked to observe. Mitchell had let him, not knowing why the old man wanted to watch the girl so badly. "She read that off a patch of brush," Mitchell said finally. His voice was strange. "From the floor of the draw, moving, with a job that wasn't even observation." He shook his head slowly. "I've got operators with 10 years who'd have walked right into that." "Yeah," Cole said quietly. "You do. Where does a kid learn to see ground like that, Cole?" Cole was quiet for a moment. He could have said it right there. He could have told Mitchell everything whose daughter he was watching, whose eyes those were, whose training was showing itself on that ridgeline. It would have ended the man's certainty in a single sentence. But it was not Cole's to tell. He had told Emily. The rest was hers. "Some people just see it," Cole said. "You either have it or you don't. That one has it. You knew that the second she shot against Reyes. You've just been fighting it because you didn't want it to be true." Mitchell did not answer. He lifted the binoculars again and watched the element move on, watched the girl fold back into the team like she had been there for years, and the crack in his wall had become something he could no longer pretend was not there. But the exercise was not over, and Mitchell, being Mitchell, was not done testing her. He keyed his radio to the exercise control net, and he made a decision that he would spend the rest of his life turning over in his mind. "Control," Mitchell said. "Escalate the scenario. Full comms blackout on the element effective now, and activate the secondary threat. Let's see how she does when it all goes wrong at once." Down in the draw, every radio died at the same instant. The team's comms went to static and stayed there. Torres tried to raise Reyes on Overwatch. Nothing. He tried to raise Mitchell. Nothing. He tried the whole net. Static. The mountains had eaten the signal or the exercise had killed it, and either way the element was suddenly alone, cut off exactly the nightmare Mitchell had promised them at dawn. And that was the moment the secondary threat activated. It came fast, the way these things come. A simulated force moving on the element from an unexpected direction, role players pushing hard laser gear hot, and suddenly the team that had been moving in good order was scrambling for cover and taking simulated fire and unable to talk to each other because every radio was dead. This was the test, not the shooting, not the ruck. This, the moment where it all falls apart at once, where the comms die and the enemy comes and the plan goes to pieces and there is no commander on the net to tell you what to do. This was where operators earned the name, and this was where Mitchell had said the ones like Emily found out that shooting was the smallest part of the job. The elements started to fragment. Without comms, men could not coordinate. Torres was yelling and no one could hear him over the noise of the simulated firefight. Briggs was pinned. Two of the men got separated. It was coming apart, and it was coming apart fast, and this was exactly what Mitchell had wanted to see. What he did not expect was who steadied it. Emily did not panic. She had spent 3 years alone in the cold, in the dark, and panic was a thing she had trained out of herself so thoroughly that it did not even reach for her anymore. The comms were dead. Fine. Comms had never been guaranteed. Her father had drilled that into her before she was 12 on hunts, where the radios failed and you had to work off hand signals and instinct and knowing where the other person would be. "You don't need a radio to lead em," her father used to say. "You need people to know where you'll be." A radio is a luxury. Being predictable to your own team and unpredictable to your enemy, that's the whole game. So Emily became predictable to her team. She moved to the highest piece of cover she could reach, where the most men could see her, and she started using her hands. Field signals. The old ones. The ones every operator knew, but few had to fall back on anymore, because the radios always worked. She signaled Torres. She signaled a rally point. She pointed out where the secondary threat was coming from, because she had already read it, already seen the direction of the push, already understood the geometry of the fight, while the men around her were still reacting to the noise. And one by one they saw her. Torres saw the girl standing in cover calm, giving clear hand signals, and Torres did the thing that changed everything. He followed them. He did not think about her age. He did not think about the ruck, or the range, or Dolan's objections. He saw someone giving clear direction in the middle of chaos, and he followed it, and where Torres went, the element went. They rallied, they consolidated on the point. Emily had picked a piece of ground she had chosen in about 2 seconds because it had cover and it had fields of fire, and it forced the secondary threat to come at them through a channel where the team could concentrate. She had read the whole fight and picked the ground to win it without a radio, without an order, without anyone telling her to. And then she did the thing that no one, not Torres, not Briggs, not even Cole, watching from the ridge, would ever forget. She looked around at the men rallying on her position at the fight that was still very much alive. And she made a battlefield decision, and she communicated it with her hands, and it was the right decision, and every operator there recognized it as the right decision the instant they understood it. She sent Briggs and 2 men wide around the flank of the secondary threat, using the terrain to hide the movement exactly the way she and Briggs had taken the first ambush from behind. And she held the rest of the element in place as the anvil, drawing the threat's attention, keeping them fixed and looking the wrong way, while the hammer swung around behind. It was textbook. It was better than textbook. It was the kind of maneuver that takes men years to learn to do under pressure, and she called it in the middle of a comms blackout, with her hands at 17, having never been in a real fight in her life. And it worked. Briggs and his 2 men came around the flank exactly where she'd sent them, exactly when she'd sent them, and they hit the secondary threat from the side while it was fixed on Emily's anvil element. And the role players' laser gear buzzed one after another as the simulated force was rolled up and neutralized in under 90 seconds. Then it was quiet, really quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a fight when everyone is checking themselves to see if they are still there. The element had held. More than held. It had taken a comms blackout and a secondary threat, and it had won cleanly without a single simulated casualty on the team. And it had done it because a 17-year-old girl had picked up the pieces of a fragmenting unit and put them back together with her bare hands, while every radio in the world stayed dead. Torres found her first. He came over cover to where she stood, and he was breathing hard, and he looked at her for a long moment, and then he did something. He took his hand and he put it flat on the top of her head gently, the way you would with a little sister, except there was nothing condescending in it. There was only wonder. "Who are you?" Torres said. It came out almost like a laugh, almost like a prayer. "Seriously, who are you?" I've been doing this for years, and I have never seen anybody do what you just did. Comms dropped, secondary threat, whole element coming apart, and you just picked us up. Hand signals. Like it was nothing. You picked up the whole team with hand signals. He shook his head. "Who taught you that?" And Emily, who had held it together through the ruck and the range, and Dolan and Cole's terrible truth, and the comms blackout, and the fight, felt something crack open just slightly. Just for a second, because Torres had asked the question with such open, uncomplicated awe that it got past her guard. "My dad," she said, and her voice was not quite steady. "Everything I did out there today, my dad taught me, before I was 12. He used to say a radio is a luxury and being predictable to your team is the whole game." She looked away out at the hills. "He'd have known exactly what to do out there. I just did what I watched him do my whole life." Torres heard that was under it, the way you hear these things. And Torres, who was young and loud and could not stand, a silence went completely quiet, and then he did the kindest thing he could have done. He did not ask. He just nodded, and he squeezed her shoulder once, and he said, "Then your dad was one hell of a soldier, and so are you." Emily could not answer. She just nodded. Up on the ridge, Mitchell had watched the whole thing through his binoculars, and Mitchell had not moved in 5 full minutes. He had escalated the scenario to break her. He had killed the comms and sent a secondary threat specifically to find the place where a 17-year-old would fall apart, because he had been so certain that place existed, so certain that shooting was a trick, and the field was where the trick stopped working. And instead, he had watched her save the element twice. Once with her eyes reading an ambush off a patch of brush, and once with her hands rebuilding a fragmenting team in the middle of a comms blackout and maneuvering it to a clean victory. He lowered the binoculars very slowly. "I sent that to break her," Mitchell said. His voice was hollow. "Comms blackout and a secondary threat. I've seen that combination break senior operators. I've seen it break team leaders." He turned to Cole. "And she led them out of it. A rookie, a kid. She led my element out of the worst thing I could throw at them, and she did it with hand signals, and she didn't have a scratch on the team when it was over." Yeah, Cole said. She did. Mitchell was quiet for a long moment. Then he said low almost to himself, where does a 17-year-old learn to hold a team together under a comms blackout, Cole? That's not talent. Talent reads when. Talent doesn't do that. That's something a person learns from somebody. That's inherited. Somebody built that into her drill by drill for years. He shook his head slowly. That's how the best ones I ever served with used to move. I only knew a handful of guys who could pick up a broken element like that with their hands and just will it back together. His voice trailed off. I only really knew one, and he's dead. Cole went very still, because Mitchell had walked right up to the edge of it without knowing. Mitchell had said the words. Somebody built that into her. I only knew one, and he's dead. And Cole stood there on the ridge holding the whole terrible truth in his chest, the daughter, the overwatch, the debt Mitchell did not know he owed. And Cole had to physically stop himself from saying it because it was not his to say. Sir, Cole said carefully, you should talk to her after the exercise. Not to test her, not to break her, just to talk to her. Ask her where she learned it. I think you should hear the answer from her. Mitchell looked at Cole strangely. Why does it sound like you already know the answer? Cole held his gaze. Because I think you are one conversation away from understanding something about that kid that's going to change how you see this whole week, Cole said quietly. And I think it needs to come from her, not from me. So go talk to her, Ryan, when this is done. Just go talk to her. Mitchell did not understand, but something in the old man's voice, some weight he had never heard in Cole before, told him this was not a suggestion he could ignore. Down in the hills, the exercise controllers called Index. The scenario was over. The element had passed in a way no rookie had ever passed it. And word of what happened in that draw and in that comms blackout was already moving through the men faster than any radio could have carried it. Emily stood in the aftermath, her father's rifle slung across her chest, and she was not thinking about passing. She was thinking about her father, about how he had reached across 3 years in a grave to pull that element out of the fire through her hands, about how everything she had done out there had been him, and how she still could not say his name out loud without something breaking loose in her chest. And she was thinking about Mitchell, because she knew what came next. She knew the exercise was over, and the results were undeniable, and the man who had thrown her file in the trash on Monday was going to have to reckon with what she had just done. And she knew from the way Cole had looked at her at dawn that a conversation was coming. A conversation where Mitchell was going to ask her where she learned it. And she was going to have to decide in that moment, face to face, whether to keep the secret she had chosen to keep, or whether the time had finally come to tell Ryan Mitchell, whose daughter had just saved the men he loved. She did not know yet what she was going to do. She only knew that the man walking down off that ridge toward her, slow and heavy with a look on his face she had never seen him wear, was carrying a debt he did not know existed to a man he did not know. He had lost twice, and that whatever happened when he reached her was going to change both of them forever. Mitchell came down off the ridge. He crossed the broken ground toward her, and the men parted to let him through, and the whole unit went quiet the way it had gone quiet in the briefing room on Monday. Except this was a different kind of quiet, a held breath kind of quiet, because everyone could feel that something was about to happen between the commander who had tried to break her and the girl who would not break. He stopped in front of her. For a long moment, Ryan Mitchell just looked at Emily Carter, and she looked back at him steady, the way she had looked back at him from the first minute, and neither of them said anything at all. Then Mitchell spoke, and his voice was not flat anymore, and it was not hard, and it was the first time all week it had been neither of those things. Carter, he said, where did you learn to do that? And Emily stood there, her father's rifle against her chest, her father's whole life in her hands, and she opened her mouth to answer him. From my father, Emily said. That was all. She had made her decision in the space of a single breath, standing there with the whole unit watching. She would not hide the truth of where the skill came from, but she would not hand him the rest of it, not like this, not as a weapon, not in front of everyone. She would give him the true answer to the question he asked and no more. Your father, Mitchell repeated. Yes, sir. He taught me everything I did out there today. The ambush, the hand signals, holding the element together when the comms went down. All of it. I've never done any of it in a real fight, but I watched him teach it to me my whole life over and over until it was just how I think. She paused. So when it all went wrong out there, I didn't have to figure out what to do. I just did what he built into me. Mitchell was quiet. Something was working behind his eyes, some recognition he could not quite name, because everything she was describing, the way she moved, the way she read, ground, the way she held people together with nothing but her hands, all of it was ringing a bell in him that he did not want to hear ring. He was a soldier, Mitchell said. It was not really a question. He was, Emily said, and there was the was out loud in front of everyone, and she let it stand. Mitchell heard it. The whole unit heard it, and Mitchell, who had buried 4 men and who knew exactly what that particular past tense cost to say, felt something shift in his chest. He passed, Mitchell said quietly. 3 years ago, Emily said, on a mission overseas. And there it was. She had not said his name. She had not said whose life he traded his for. She had drawn the line exactly where she meant to draw it, giving the truth right up to the edge of the thing that would have detonated and then stopping. It was the most disciplined thing she had done all week. Harder than the ruck, harder than the shooting, harder than the fight, because it would have been so easy to say the rest, so easy to end all of it with 4 more words, and she did not. Mitchell looked at her for a long moment. He did not know. He could not have known. Carter was a common name, and the Army does not tell a ground force commander the names of every fallen man's children. He was standing 3 feet from the daughter of the Overwatch who had died to save his life, and he did not know it, and everything in him was telling him only that this girl had a dead soldier father and that he had spent a week trying to break her. I owe you an apology, Mitchell said. The words came out slow, like they cost him something, because they did. The whole unit went dead still. Mitchell did not apologize. In 6 years of command, the men had never once heard him say those words to anyone. I threw your file in the trash, Mitchell said. First minute you walked into my briefing room, I called you a child. I told my men you'd be gone by Friday. I told you the shooting was a trick. I sent you into that scenario this morning trying to break you. I did all of that, and I did it because I looked at you and I decided I already knew who you were before you'd fired a single shot. He shook his head slowly. I was wrong about every part of it, and a good leader admits when he's wrong, so I'm sorry, Carter. I was wrong about you. Emily stood there and took it, and it was not triumph she felt. It was something more complicated than triumph, because she was looking at a man apologizing to her with real weight in his voice, and she knew what he did not know, that this same man was alive because her father had chosen to die. And the apology landed on her strangely sideways because part of her wanted to tell him, it's okay you don't understand, you have no idea what you already owe me, and the other part of her held the line. Thank you, sir, was all she said. It means something you saying that. Dolan, Mitchell said without turning around. Come here. Dolan came. Slowly, he had watched the whole scenario had been on the element. When Emily called the ambush, he insisted was not there had been overruled and proven wrong on the record in front of everyone. And he had spent the walk out of the hills with his stomach in a knot, because a man who stakes his whole identity on being right does not recover easily from being that publicly wrong. He stopped next to Mitchell and he could not quite look at Emily. You told this element there was nothing on that north ridge, Mitchell said. You told them to keep walking into a kill box. If Carden hadn't held the element and sent Briggs up that reverse slope, this whole team walks into a prepared ambush and half of them are simulated dead right now, including you. Mitchell let that sit. You want to say something to her. Dolan was quiet for a long moment, and then something happened in the big man's face, something breaking loose. And when he spoke, it was not the loud voice anymore. It was quieter, and it was real. You were right, Dolan said. He made himself look at her when he said it. On the ridge, I was so sure. I was so sure you were just a scared kid seeing ghosts, and I said it on the net, and I was wrong, and you'd have been right to let me walk into that just to prove it. He swallowed. But you didn't. You didn't make it about being right. You made it about the team. Even after everything I said to you this week, even after what I said during that stress drill. He stopped. His jaw worked. That was low what I said in the drill. About your dad. I heard you'd lost him and I used it to try to rattle you. And that's not who I want to be. I've been telling myself all week you didn't belong here. Truth is I was scared you did. Because if a 17-year-old kid belonged here, then maybe I've been coasting on being the loud guy for a lot longer than I earned. He shook his head. I'm sorry, Carter, for all of it. It was without question the hardest thing Dolan had ever said to anyone. And the unit knew it, and they watched him say it, and something changed in the way they looked at him too, because it takes a certain kind of man to stake his whole week on being right and then stand in front of everyone and admit he was wrong. Emily looked at him for a moment, and then she did the thing that finished it, the thing that turned Dolan from an enemy into something else entirely. "You want to know the truth, Sergeant," she said. "You almost got me twice this week. On the ruck at mile 9 when you told me I'd crash in the last 2 miles. And in the drill when you said what you said about Maiden. Both times I felt it. You read people well. That's a real skill. Most people who tried to rattle me this week couldn't find the crack. You found it twice." She let that land. "That's why I'd rather have you reading the enemy for me than reading me. A guy who can find the crack that fast is a guy I want on my side out there. So let's be on the same side. That's all I ever wanted." Dolan stared at her, and then something in the big man's eyes went bright and wet just for a second before he blinked it back, because she had just taken the worst things he had done to her all week and turned them into a reason to want him on her team. She had found the good soldier still buried under the loud one, and she had called it out by name, and she had offered him a way back that let him keep his dignity. "Yeah," Dolan said roughly. "Yeah, same side. You got it, Carter." He stuck out his hand, a huge hand, and it swallowed hers when she took it, and the handshake between the loudest doubter and the girl he had doubted was the moment the last of the unit came all the way over. Torres, of course, could not let the moment stay heavy. "Does this mean I still get my beer for a month?" he called out. "Because she was right, which means I win the bet, which means she buys right. That's how the bet worked. Somebody explained the bet to me because I think I'm owed beer." The whole unit cracked up, the tension breaking all at once into laughter, and even Mitchell almost smiled, and Emily shook her head at Torres with something that was very close to affection, and for the first time since she had walked into that briefing room on Monday, she felt like she was standing among her own. Only Cole was not laughing. Cole stood at the edge of it all, watching Mitchell apologize, watching Dolan break open, watching the unit fold Emily into itself, and Cole carried the whole weight of what none of them knew, and it sat on the old man like a stone. Because he was watching Ryan Mitchell make peace with the daughter of the man who died for him, and Mitchell had no idea. And Cole understood that this was a peace built on a thing that could not stay hidden forever. That evening, Mitchell found her alone. She was outside again in her spot cleaning her father's rifle in the last of the light, doing the thing that steadied her, and she heard his footsteps, and she knew who it was, and she did not stop cleaning. "Mind if I sit?" Mitchell said. "No, sir." He lowered himself down near her, and for a while he did not say anything. He just watched her hands work the rifle, and something about the way she did it seemed to trouble him, seemed to snag on something in his memory, though he could not have said what. "That's an old rifle," Mitchell said finally. "That's not standard issue. That's a personal weapon, and it's been rebuilt, and it's been rebuilt by somebody who knew exactly what they were doing." "It was my father's," Emily said. "I rebuilt it myself over 3 years, replaced most of the parts. But the core of it was his." Mitchell nodded slowly. He watched her check the bolt. Twice. Always twice, even when once was enough, and something moved across his face. "He check his bolt like that?" Mitchell asked, and his voice had gone strange. "Twice every time, even when he didn't need to." Emily's hands went still. "Yes," she said carefully. "How did you know that?" Mitchell did not answer right away. He was staring at her hands and then at her face, and there was a dawning thing happening behind his eyes, a terrible slow recognition rising up out of somewhere deep, because he had known exactly one man who checked his bolt twice like that, who did it as a ritual, who used to say once is for the rifle and twice is for the soul. "Emily," Mitchell said slowly, "what was your father's full name?" And there it was. The moment she had held the line to avoid. It had come anyway, not because she reached for it, but because the truth had a way of finding its own path, because a man cannot check his bolt exactly the way his father did in front of a man who watched that same father die and have it stay hidden forever. She could still lie, even now. She could give a different name. She could protect him from it. But her father had taught her something in all those years underneath the shooting, in the ground reading, and the hand signals. He had taught her that some truths you do not get to choose whether to carry you, only get to choose whether to carry them honestly. And Mitchell had just asked her a direct question, looking at her with his whole heart open in a way she had never seen, and she was not going to lie to a man who had died a little every day for 3 years, over a debt he was about to discover he owed her. David Carter, Emily said quietly. My father's name was David Carter. The world went silent. Mitchell did not move. He did not breathe. He sat there into the fading light and he stared at her, and she watched the name go into him like a blade watched it travel down through 6 years of command and 3 years of grief and land in the deepest, most guarded place he had. And she watched Ryan Mitchell, the hardest man she had ever met, begin to come apart. No, he said. It came out as barely a whisper. No, that's not Carter's a common name. There's a lot of Carters. That's not. He was an army marksman, Emily said gently. 22 years. He died 3 years ago on a rescue operation overseas. He was the overwatch. He held his position after he was hit so the last people could get clear. Every hostage came home, and the team leader he was covering. She stopped. She made herself say it softly, without weight, the way you set down something heavy so it does not shatter. The team leader he bought time for got out because my father stayed. Mitchell's face broke. There was no other word for it. The whole architecture of the man, the flat hardness, the command presence, the wall he had built brick by brick over 3 years, all of it came down at once. And what was underneath was not a captain. It was just a man who had carried a dead soldier on his back every single day, and who had just discovered that the soldier's daughter had been standing in front of him all week while he threw her file in the trash and called her a child. It was me, Mitchell said. His voice was wrecked. I was the team leader. I was the ground force commander. Your father, David, he was my overwatch. He held that rooftop. He put a hand over his mouth. His eyes had gone bright and wet, and he was not blinking it back the way Dolan had. He could not. It was past that. He was hit, and he stayed. Command told him to pull out, and he stayed. Because I still had 2 people in the open, and if he pulled out, they were dead. He knew. He knew what staying meant, and he stayed anyway. For me, for 2 people he'd never met. Mitchell's voice cracked all the way through. I'm alive because your father chose to die on that rooftop. And I've carried him every day for 3 years. Every day. And he could not finish it. I know, Emily said softly. I've known since 2 nights ago, Cole told me. He served with my dad. He recognized the name in my file. Mitchell turned to look at her, and his face was a ruin. You've known, he said. You've known for 2 days. I sent you into that scenario this morning to break you. I called you a child. I threw your file in the trash. And you knew. The whole time. You knew that I was. He stopped. Why didn't you tell me? My God, Emily, why didn't you say something? You could have ended all of it. One word. Why did you let me keep? Because my father didn't die so I could use it, Emily said. And that stopped him completely. He held that rooftop after he was hit, she said, and her own voice was not steady now. 3 years of held-back grief pressing up against the walls of it. For strangers. Because it was the cop. What, so his daughter could show up somewhere years later and cash it in for an easier ride. If I told you who I was to make you stop doubting me, I'd be spending his death to win something I hadn't earned. And I wasn't going to do that to him. A tear finally broke loose and ran down her face, and she did not wipe it away. I wanted to earn my place here as Emily, as a shooter and a soldier, not as David Carter's daughter collecting on a debt you didn't even know you owed. Because that's what he taught me. Know why you're pulling the trigger. Not what. Why. And using his sacrifice to make my week easier, that was the wrong why. So I held the line. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was the right why. Mitchell looked at her, and the tears were running freely down the hard planes of his face now. And he was not ashamed of them, and something was happening in him that went beyond grief. Something like awe, because he was looking at the living proof of the man who had saved him, and she was everything her father had been: the discipline, the quiet, the refusal to take the easy path, all of it alive and sitting in front of him. He'd be so proud of you, Mitchell said, echoing without knowing it the exact words Cole had said 2 nights before. Emily, he would be so proud of you. Not for the shooting, although God, the shooting, but for that, for what you just said, for holding that line. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, roughly the way a man does when he is not used to it. He used to say that, almost word for word. On the rooftop before it went bad, we were talking and he showed me a picture. A little girl behind a rifle way too big for her, And he said, "That's my Emily. She's gonna be better than me someday." And I asked him what he was teaching her, and he said, "Mostly I'm teaching her why. Anybody can teach a kid to shoot. I'm teaching her why." Mitchell's voice broke again. "I forgot that. I forgot he said that until right now. 3 years and I forgot. And you just said it back to me word for word. Know why you're pulling the trigger." "Not what? Why?" Emily could not speak. She had never known that. She had never known her father showed Mitchell her picture on that rooftop in the last hour of his life, had never known he said her name and called her his, and told a stranger she would be better than him someday. It was a piece of her father she had never had delivered to her by the man he died to save, and it broke the last of her composure completely, and she put her face in her hands, and 3 years of grief that she had rationed out 1 minute at a time finally came all the way out. Mitchell did not try to stop it. He did not say anything. He just moved a little closer and he put his arm around her, this hard man who had spent a week trying to break her, and he held David Carter's daughter while she wept, and his own tears fell into her hair, and the two of them sat there in the dark, bound together by a dead man. Neither of them could stop loving. After a while, when the worst of it had passed, Mitchell spoke again, and his voice was quiet and certain in a way it had never been all week. "I need you to hear something," he said, "and I need you to believe it because it's true, and I'd have said it even if you weren't his daughter. What you did out there today, you didn't earn your place here as David Carter's daughter. You earned it as Emily Carter. You beat Reyes on the range fair and square. You read that ambush off a patch of brush that 10-year operators would have walked right into. You held my element together in a comms blackout with your bare hands. You did all of that as yourself before it could ever be about your father. You earned it, clean, on your own. And nobody in this unit, not one man, is ever going to be able to say different because they all watched you do it." He squeezed her shoulder. "Your father gave you the tools, but you're the one who picked them up and carried them here alone for 3 years and became this. That's yours. Nobody gets to take that from you, not even him." Emily lifted her head and looked at him, and something settled in her that had not been settled since she was 14 years old and watched two officers walk up the path to her door. "Thank you," she whispered, "for saying that. That's the thing I needed. I needed to know I earned it as me." "You did," Mitchell said. "I promise you, you did." They sat there a while longer as the last light went out of the sky. And then Mitchell said almost to himself, "I have to tell the men, not to make you a symbol, but because I owe your father the truth of who's standing in this unit. They should know whose daughter fought beside them today. They should know what your family gave. That's not cashing in a dead Emily. That's honoring a man. There's a difference, and I think even your father would see the difference." Emily thought about it, and she nodded slowly. "There's a difference," she agreed. "Honoring him isn't the same as using him. Yeah, they can know, but not for me, for him." "For him," Mitchell agreed. He told them the next morning. He stood the unit up, and he told them simply and without drama that the rookie they had watched dominate the ruck and beat Reyes and read that ambush and save the element in the blackout was the daughter of Sergeant First Class David Carter, and that David Carter had died 3 years ago, holding an overwatch position after he was hit so that a trapped assault element could withdraw. And then Mitchell told them the part that made the whole room go silent and still. "That assault element was mine," Mitchell said. "I was the ground force commander that day. I'm standing here because David Carter chose to stay on that rooftop and die so I could get out." He looked at Emily standing at the end of the line the way she had that first cold morning. His daughter has known this entire time. She's known since her second night here, and she never said a word. She never used it. Not when I threw her file in the trash, not when I called her a child, not when I sent her into a scenario built to break her. She could have ended all of it with one sentence, and she chose not to because she wanted to earn her place as herself, and because she said her father didn't die so she could cash it in. Mitchell's voice was rough. "I have served with a lot of soldiers. I have rarely served with that kind of discipline. So when you look at Emily Carter, I don't want you to see a symbol, and I don't want you to see a kid, and I sure as hell don't want you to see a favor. I want you to see a soldier who earned every inch of her place here twice over. Once with her hands, and once with her silence." The unit did not laugh. The unit did not murmur. The unit came to attention, all of them at once, without an order, and they held it, and they looked at Emily, And in that room full of hardened operators, there was not one dry eye that could be found. If you looked, though, every man there would have denied it. Dolan broke ranks first. He walked down the line to Emily and he stopped in front of her, and he was crying openly now, the big loud man who had promised she would be gone by Friday, and he did not care who saw it. "Your dad," Dolan said thickly. "Your dad's the reason our captain came home. And I spent a week he could not finish." He just shook his head. "I'm going to spend the rest of my career making it up to you. I mean that. You need anything ever anywhere you call me and I come. That's a debt now. That's a real one." And one by one the men came down the line, and one by one they stopped in front of David Carter's daughter, and they shook her hand, or they gripped her shoulder, or they simply stood in front of her and could not find the words. And Emily took all of it, and somewhere above them, she was sure her father was watching, and she was sure that for the first time in 3 years, she had made him proud in exactly the way he would have wanted, not by winning, but by knowing why. Cole was the last to come. The old man walked down the line, slow every joint, remembering every mile, and he stopped in front of her, and he looked at her for a long time with those flat old eyes that had gone soft at the edges. "He'd have loved to see this," Cole said quietly. "All of it, but especially the part where you held the line and didn't tell them. That was him. That was David in you, clear as anything I ever saw." He put his hand on her shoulder, heavy and gentle. "You did him proud, kid. You did him so proud. And you did it your way, which is the only way that would have meant anything to him." Emily put her hand over the old man's hand, and she held it there, and she did not trust herself to speak. She did not have to. Some things do not need words. Her father had taught her that too. The weeks that followed changed everything, and they changed nothing, and both of those things were true at the same time. They changed everything because Emily Carter was no longer the girl nobody believed in. Word of what happened at that selection moved through the base and then beyond it, the way stories do in the military, passed man to man in chow halls and on ranges and in the backs of vehicles on long drives. The daughter of the Overwatch who died to save the assault element. The 17-year-old who beat Reyes and read the ambush off a patch of brush and held the element together in a comms blackout. The kid who knew the whole time, whose life her father had traded for and never once used it. That story traveled and it grew. And it did the thing that true stories do, which is that it made people who heard it stand a little straighter and think a little harder about who they had been underestimating in their own lives. And they changed nothing because Emily did not change. That was the part that meant the most to the men who watched her. She could have coasted after that. She could have let the story carry her. Nobody would have blamed her if she'd eased off, if she'd let being David Carter's daughter become the thing she was, instead of the thing she came from. She did not ease off. She trained harder. The morning after Mitchell told the unit who she was, Emily was on the line at 0400, exactly the way she had been every morning. Kit squared away, standing in the dark like she had grown out of the ground, and when Torres came out and saw her there, he laughed out loud. "You know you don't have to prove anything anymore, right?" Torres said. "The whole base knows. You could sleep in. You've earned a little sleep in." "That's exactly why I don't sleep in," Emily said. "The day I start coasting on what I did last week is the day I stop being what my dad made me. He didn't train me to have one good week. He trained me to have every week. So I'm going to have every week." Torres looked at her for a moment, and then he shook his head, and then without a word he went and got his own kit, and he stood on the line next to her in the dark, because that is what her discipline did to the people around her. It did not shame them. It pulled them up. That was the thing Mitchell had started to understand about her, and it was the thing that troubled him most in the best possible way. He had spent 6 years commanding by hardness, by being the immovable wall that men either measured up to or washed out against. He had believed that was leadership. He had believed that grief and hardness were the same thing that carrying David Carter's death meant becoming stone. And then David Carter's daughter had shown up and led an entire element out of a comms blackout, not by being the hardest person there, but by being the steadiest, by making people feel seen by picking them up instead of grinding them down. She had made Torres better by stealing his footwork and telling him he was the best at it. She had made Briggs loyal by listening to him. She had turned Dolan, of all people, from an enemy into a man who would come running from anywhere if she called. She had done it all without raising her voice once. And Mitchell, watching it, had to reckon with the possibility that he had been carrying David Carter wrong for 3 years. That the man he was honoring by becoming stone had never been stone. That David had been exactly like his daughter, steady instead of hard, the kind of man who pulled people up, the kind of man who held a rooftop after he was hit, not out of some grim iron in him, but out of love, out of the same warmth Mitchell now saw in Emily every single day. He said as much to Cole one evening weeks in. "I've been doing it wrong," Mitchell said. They were watching Emily run a room-clearing drill with a group of newer soldiers coaching them the way Briggs had once coached her patient generous, seeing each of them. 3 years, I thought the way to honor him was to make sure I was never soft again, never caught unready again. I turned myself into a wall because I decided soft is what gets people killed." He shook his head slowly. "And then his kid shows up, and she's the least hard person I've ever commanded, and she's also the best, and I can't make those two things fit together in my head. Because in my head, best means hardest. And she's not hard. She's—" he searched for the word. "She's steady," Cole said. "There's a difference. Hard breaks. Steady holds." David was steady. Never once saw the man raise his voice. Never once saw him lose his center. And I saw him in some places that would take the center right out of most men. Cole was quiet for a moment. "You spent 3 years turning yourself into the thing David never was, and telling yourself you were doing it for him. His daughter just showed you what he actually was. That's a hard mirror to look in, Ryan. But you should look in it, because I think it's the last thing he had left to teach you, and he taught it to you through her." Mitchell did not answer for a long time. He watched Emily crouch down next to a nervous young soldier who kept fumbling his corner, and he watched her say something quiet to the kid, and he watched the kid's whole posture change, watched him settle, watched him do it right the next time, and light up when he did. "Yeah," Mitchell said finally, and his voice was rough. "Yeah, I've got some things to unlearn." He started unlearning them. It was not fast and it was not clean, because a man does not undo 6 years of command style in a month, but the men noticed. They noticed the captain asking questions instead of only giving orders. They noticed him coaching where he used to just correct. They noticed most of all that the hardest man on the base had gotten a little more human since David Carter's daughter arrived, and they understood, without anyone saying it, that she had done that too. She had led her own commander somewhere better without ever once trying to. There was a moment about a month in that tested all of it. A new group of candidates came through selection, and among them was a young man, 19, cocky loud, the kind of candidate who reminded everyone a little of who Dolan used to be. And this candidate found out that one of the operators evaluating him was a teenage girl, and he did exactly what the whole unit had once done to Emily. He laughed. He made a comment. He said something about being evaluated by a child. The unit went quiet, because they had been that once, every one of them. And now they got to watch it from the other side, and it was ugly to see from the other side, and several of them started to move toward the kid to set him straight. Mitchell held up a hand. "Stop them." "Let her handle it," Mitchell said quietly. "This is hers." Emily walked over to the candidate. She did not raise her voice. She did not pull rank. She looked at him with that same calm she had looked at Mitchell with on the first day, and she said something the whole unit strained to hear. "You think you already know who I am," Emily said. "You looked at me and you decided. That's fine, people do that. But out where this unit operates, the ground doesn't care what you decided about anybody. It only cares what's true. So here's what we're going to do. You're going to go through selection, and I'm going to evaluate you honestly, and at the end of it, you're going to know exactly what's true about you. Not what you decided, what's true, and I promise you that's a harder test than any range." She paused. "My father told me being underestimated is a gift because it means the other person already made a mistake before you fired a shot. You just made yours. Now let's see if you're good enough that it doesn't matter." The candidate did not have anything to say to that, and the unit watched Emily do to a doubter exactly what she had done to all of them, which was refuse to fight him and instead simply promise him the truth. And Dolan, standing in the back, laughed once under his breath and said to nobody in particular, "God, she's just like her old man, isn't she? I never even met the guy, and I know she's just like him." The candidate, for the record, washed out on day 3. Not because Emily was hard on him, because he could not stop deciding things about himself instead of proving them, and the ground does not care what you decide. She evaluated him honestly exactly as she'd promised, and honestly he was not ready. She told him so without cruelty and without triumph. And she told him to come back when he was willing to be underestimated without letting it make him small. And some of the men thought that was the most useful thing anybody said to that kid the whole week. The months turned. Emily kept training. She kept getting better, which the men had not thought was possible, but she did. Because that was the thing about her. She had no ceiling that anyone could find. And every time they thought she had reached the top of what she could do, she found another level. And then came the day she was accepted. She became one of the youngest members ever brought into the Eagle Recon Unit's advanced training program. And when the acceptance came through, Mitchell called the unit together to tell them. And the room that had once laughed at her erupted, instead grown men, whooping and pounding each other on the back like she had won something for all of them, which in a way she had. But Emily herself did not celebrate. The men noticed that too. When the acceptance came through, she did not whoop. She did not pump her fist. She went very quiet and her eyes went somewhere far away. And Mitchell, who knew her now, knew exactly where she had gone. She had gone to her father. That evening, she was in her spot cleaning his rifle in the last of the light, and Mitchell came and sat with her the way he did now. And for a while, neither of them said anything. "You're not happy," Mitchell said finally. "You made it, youngest ever. And you're sitting out here like somebody died." "Somebody did," Emily said quietly. 3 years ago." She kept cleaning the rifle. "I keep thinking about how he'll never know. He spent my whole childhood telling me I'd be better than him someday. And I made it into the kind of unit he served in, and I did it his way, and he'll never know. I did the whole thing for him, and he'll never know I did it." A tear ran down her face, and she did not wipe it away. "That's the part that gets me. Not that he's gone. I've made my peace with gone. It's that he doesn't get to see. He put all of this into me, and he doesn't get to see what grew." Mitchell was quiet for a long moment, and then he said something that Emily would carry for the rest of her life. "He saw," Mitchell said. Emily looked at him. "On that rooftop," Mitchell said, "the last hour of his life. He pulled out that picture of you, the little girl behind the rifle, too big for her, and he showed it to me, and his whole face lit up. And he said, 'That's my Emily. She's going to be better than me someday.' He didn't say might be. He didn't say I hope. He said she's going to be. Present tense, certain, like it was already true." Mitchell's voice thickened. "Emily, your father didn't die wondering whether you'd make it. He died knowing you would. He saw it. He saw all of this, everything you just did. He saw it in you when you were a little kid, and he never once doubted it. You keep thinking he doesn't get to see what grew. He's the one who saw it first. Before anybody. Before you. He knew what you'd be before you had any idea. That's not a man who doesn't get to see. That's a man who saw further than the rest of us. He just saw it from further away." Emily broke down completely, and Mitchell put his arm around her the way he had that first night, and he held David Carter's daughter while she wept, and this time the weeping was not only grief, it was release. It was 3 years of carrying a weight finally set down. Because she had needed, without ever knowing she needed it, to be told that her father had died certain of her, that his last hour held her face and her name and his absolute faith that she would become exactly what she had become. And the man who could tell her that the only man alive who had been there had just given it to her. "He knew," Emily whispered. "He knew I'd make it. He never doubted it for 1 second," Mitchell said. "Not one. You were the surest thing in his whole life. He told a stranger on a rooftop in the last hour before he died that his girl was going to be better than him. And Emily." Mitchell pulled back and looked at her, and his eyes were streaming, and he did not care. "You are. You're better than him. Not because you shoot better, though God knows. Because you did the thing he never had the chance to fully do. You took everything he was, and you carried it forward. That's the one thing a father can't do for himself. Only a kid can do that. And you did it. You are his best work, and it's finished, and it's standing right here in front of me, and if there's any way at all that he can see, then he's looking at the proudest thing he ever made." Emily could not speak. She just nodded, and she held on to that, and she would hold on to it for the rest of her life. They sat there until the light was gone. The story of Emily Carter kept traveling after that. It went places she never went. It reached young soldiers she never met, and young women, especially girls who had been told they were too small, or too young, or too soft for the thing they wanted. And they heard about the 17-year-old who walked into a room full of elite operators who laughed at her and walked out having beaten every single one of them, not with noise, but with discipline. And some of those girls stood a little straighter. And some of them picked up the thing they'd been told to put down. And that, more than the unit, more than the acceptance, more than any of it, was the part that would have meant the most to David Carter. Because David Carter never cared about being famous. He cared about the why. And the why had grown legs and walked out into the world through his daughter and started changing lives he would never see. Dolan, true to his word, spent the rest of his career making it up to her. And the funny thing was, it stopped being about making anything up somewhere along the way and just became a friendship. The loud man and the quiet girl, the doubter and the one he doubted, and Dolan would tell anyone who'd listen that the best thing that ever happened to him as a soldier was getting proven dead wrong by a 17-year-old, because it woke him up, because he'd been coasting on being loud for years, and she'd shown him what earning it actually looked like. Torres never did collect his beer, and he brought it up constantly, and it became a running joke that outlived the reason for it. And years later, people who never knew the original bet would hear Torres demanding his month of beer from Emily Carter and have no idea what he was talking about, and that was somehow perfect. Ray, is the man who had once gently told her not to feel bad when she lost, became one of her closest mentors. And he used to say that getting beaten by Emily Carter on that range was the day he stopped being certain, and that not being certain anymore had made him a better shooter than certainty ever had, because her father had been right about that too. Certainty is where good shooters go to miss. And Cole, the old man who carried the truth before anyone who served with David Carter for 11 years and recognized his ghost in a teenage girl's hands. Cole retired not long after, and on his last day he came to find Emily in her spot cleaning the rifle in the last of the light, and he stood over her for a while, and then he said the thing he'd been holding on to since the first day. "I made a promise to your dad once," Cole said, "years back. We were in a bad spot, and we didn't know how it'd go, and he said to me, 'Cole, if it goes wrong for me and it doesn't for you, you find my girl someday, and you make sure she knows I never doubted her.' And I said I would. And then it did go wrong for him, and I didn't know how to keep it, because how do you find somebody's kid? How do you walk up to a stranger and say that?" He shook his head slowly. "And then you walked into a briefing room with his name on your file. And I thought, well, there it is. He sent her to me so I could keep my promise." Cole's old eyes were bright. "He never doubted you, Emily. He told me to make sure you knew. So now you know. That's the last thing I had to do. He sent you to me so I could tell you." Emily stood up and she put her arms around the old man, and Cole, who was not a man who got hugged, stood stiff for a second and then softened and hugged her back. And the two of them held on the old soldier and the young one, bound together by a man they both loved and both missed and both carried. "Thank you," Emily whispered, "for keeping your promise, for all of it." "Thank you, Dad," Cole said gruffly. "I just delivered the message. He's the one who never doubted." And then Cole walked off into his retirement, and Emily watched him go. And she understood that she had not just inherited her father's rifle and his skill and his why. She had inherited his people, his brothers, the men who loved him. They had come to her across the years, one by one, carrying pieces of him she'd never had. And together they had given her father back to her in a way the folded flag never could. Years passed. Emily Carter became everything her father saw. When she was 10 years old behind a rifle too big for her, she became a leader, not a hard one, a steady one, exactly like him, the kind who pulled people up instead of grinding them down. She trained soldiers who trained soldiers. Her why spread through them and through the ones they touched, generation after generation, further than she would ever be able to trace, which was exactly how her father would have wanted it, because the best ones are the ones you never hear about, and their work lives on in people who never knew their names. And she never stopped on the quiet evenings cleaning her father's rifle in the last of the light. She never stopped checking the bolt twice. It's always twice, even when once was enough. Once is for the rifle, he used to say. Twice is for the soul. And every time she did it, she felt him there, one hand light on her shoulder, his voice low in her ear, the way it had been her whole life, the way it would be until the end of hers. "Talk to me about the wind, Em." "I've got the wind, Dad. I've always got the wind. You made sure of that." The teenager everyone dismissed became the sniper. Everyone trusted, and then the leader. Everyone followed, and then the legend. Nobody could quite believe was real. But that was never the point, and Emily knew it. And it was the one thing she made sure every young soldier who came through her hands understood before they left them. The point was never proving the doubters wrong. The doubters did not matter. They never had. The point was knowing why you pulled the trigger and carrying the people who made you forward into the world and refusing to let anyone else's doubt become your limitation and staying steady when everything came apart and picking up the ones around you instead of grinding them down. The point was the why. Her father had built his whole life around teaching her that, and he had died certain she'd carry it, and she had, and she always would. Because in the end, the greatest victory was never silencing the elite unit that laughed at her on the first day. The greatest victory was becoming the woman her father knew she'd be the one he saw from further away than anyone, the one he died certain of. And she became her, completely, without compromise, exactly the way he taught her. Emily Carter was never just a teen sniper. She was David Carter's daughter, and she was his finest work, and she was proof for every person who was ever underestimated that the one they dismissed as the weakest in the room is so often the one who prepared the most. She carried her father forward, and she never once put him down, and she never will. That is who she is. That is who she always was. And nobody will ever be able to say otherwise because they all watched her become it.